everybody, welcome back to another game devlog. This is week number, or devlog number 59. Alright, so this week, I'll just discuss what I did this week, and I don't think I'll be doing a demo because there's really not too much to show. I'll just do an in-talk demo here. So at the beginning of the week, I was kind of at a turning point financially. I was kind of sitting down and saying, should I continue this project? And I've come this far, 59 weeks, and I thought I'd be tapped out. I was starting to get worried around week 20, but I made it this far, so I'm just going to keep on going. I was looking around the environment, for other opportunities, but the economy is really bad in the tech market, so I'm just going to keep going and keep going down with the ship financially as long as I can go until I can no longer do it anymore. So on it goes. I'll just continue putting in the work. I have no better opportunities in life currently as I considered, and I considered it very carefully. Nothing has changed as of yet. So just tackling the next things on the board. I went back to the Kanban board and kind of picked out what's next after working on the new character features. The beginning of the week I wrapped up the last of the new character features. That included just a couple things. One of the things I worked on. I worked on the injured animations. So when I get injured, I made sure that I just polished everything up so where I want to walk backwards, it doesn't look so awkward, and everything's looking pretty good as good as I can get it for the injured animations. So I'm happy with that. And then the last new feature was weapon lasers. So I kind of worked on for each weapon has like a laser, so you can see what happens is it shines a little laser in the front here, but it doesn't go all the way through, so it's not taking up a lot of stuff. You're not really seeing the laser go all over the place, inside the game, but it will highlight whatever endpoint it's looking at. So when I was working on this, I actually came up with a better way to calculate the because I was always having an issue with the final IK. You'd always get this stuttering endpoint because whatever is affected by the final IK, it would, whether it's the scene or the game, I always get this flickering effect where the position of the aim would kind of flicker to where the non-IK. It's just a weird thing that was always happening all through my aiming testing, but I finally got stable and reliable in all, in scene and in game by calculating with a side coroutine and then just pulling that data off. So now I don't see anything anymore. So it's pretty reliable. And so I'm happy with that. Finally got that problem cornered. That was kind of a tricky one working with final IK. And I just did lasers for the rest of the weapons here, and also I went and fixed the weapon impact, so you can see weapon marks, which is pretty cool. So that's pretty much the extent of demoable features I can show today. One of the features I actually did that I forgot to talk about was I implemented one of the character features was the footsteps functionality. Like when you walk, there should be some sort of audio play with the footsteps, right? And that took some doing. For some reason, luckily Invector had some sort of functionality for that, but out of the box, it didn't quite work correctly with my with my character controller, something was going wrong. As you can see, these colliders, they are moving with the feet, but they had placed them on the actual automatically on the player rig, and for some reason the colliders were not detecting on trigger enter and exit correctly when they interacted with the surface of the ground when they were on the rig. So I couldn't quite figure out why that was happening. It was actually not happening in the demo, but for some reason my rig setup, it wasn't allowing that detection to occur correctly. So what I did, I had to move the colliders outside of the rig and actually set up a transform to follow on the rig, so that they'll be set on the update, so they'll actually move outside the rig, and that allowed the colliders to detect the ground on and off correctly, and then you can hear the footstep sounds. It's very, you can kind of hear that. It's kind of subtle because I don't have the sound all the way up, but that's so now it has a bit of sound. It's not completely silent when you're walking, and I think that's pretty cool. So that's one of the things I did this week. As far as in-game, the rest of the week, I turned to the next big kind of section of work, which is like a checkpoint system, right? So what needs to happen during certain points in the game, I need to so I set up an initial checkpoint system with actually the game init load, so loading the very first, there's a bit of a prototype checkpoint system where when you load the game, it'll load the initial checkpoint and it'll place the character and then fire off any events that should occur after the checkpoint happens. And I kind of had to start and this checkpoint system is a lot of new requirements for it, because before I had implemented some sort of saving system with persistence, but it was more like a Half-Life style, where you could bring up the menu and save pretty much anywhere. You could save your position, you can save your exact location, and then on command you can. In fact, I think I already had. Yeah, it says like save load right in the menu, right? And that's okay. That's good for a prototype to kind of demonstrate the saving and persistent functionality. But for this game, I really wanted like a checkpoint system where you don't really have control over when and where you save, except where, when you cross an invisible trigger, then the checkpoint system will save that data of not where you are during that time, but it'll have predefined, like if you cross a checkpoint, if you die, it'll spawn you in this position here, right? So I need to, kind of rework my save system and a new system, so I check a checkpoint system. So how do I incorporate that into the game load process? I already had the initial checkpoint data prototype so I kind of started from the beginning, and so now this new leg of work for the project is we're really doing a lot of coding now and a lot of systems work. So what I had to do, I had to revisit my initial game load from Init, and I kind of had to look at the code and kind of say, okay, at this point, Game Manager's load, it's handling all the initial game loading, and that's fine. But I kind of went through on Wednesday. I kind of went through and kind of figured out to the drawing board, because I have to kind of design a system. How do I kind of imagine how this would work. And a basic starting point was to look at the initial game loading process and how is it handling the checkpoint system thus far. And I kind of went through the Game Manager class and kind of identified, okay, this piece of functionality, this should really be this is actually now the responsibility of the level manager. the game manager should do some initialized loading, but the level manager should actually take over at some point and actually load in things like. So the game manager should load in the proper level manager, whatever level you're on, based on the actual chapter persistent data, and then the level manager should take that checkpoint data and say, oh, okay, I'm gonna load the correct scene that you should be on, meaning I'm gonna load, scene manager, and I'm going to tell you, which it got data like which sector you should be in, where your position should be loaded, and then once you load any events, in-game events that should be executed when that happens. So this whole system, but I had to get the initial game load process correct, and so I did a lot of analysis and refactoring of the game manager. Not too crazy, but just moving out essential portions of the code. So now that in the load process, the level manager will be responsible for taking over at some point and loading the actual level scene instead of the game manager doing everything. And this will assist in the fact, so when you do a death and you reload, the game manager won't be responsible for loading the actual reloading the scene or reloading the character. The level manager will actually be responsible. It'll read its current checkpoint and say, okay, do I need to swap scenes, or do I just need to place the character at the position he was? What do I need to do? So the level manager is going to be in charge of that functionality. So it took me a bit to actually rework the game manager functionality and get through a bunch of stuff. A lot of testing, a lot of bug fixes, but I a couple days into that, I like the place that I'm in right now. I got a very robust system for initial game loading for when you're loading it with the scene manager in a production environment, when you're loading it in development, and also when you're loading it from the game menu in development, and also when you're starting the game without the main menu. So some of the trickier things were actually implementing. So after I got I kind of pinned down and got the initial game loading working, I wanted a way to actually, because I hadn't done this yet, I wanted a way to actually exit the game and go back to the main menu. Previously, you click on this, nothing would happen. I'm not actually sure what would happen. I can actually try this and to see. I haven't actually tested quitting from not starting from the main menu, but let's just see what happens here. So you quit. Yeah, it fades out. It'll do this here. Yeah, it actually worked. Okay, so it'll go back to the main menu. Previously, I'd implemented a very prototype functionality where it would go back to the main menu, but it would push to the game over screen. And that was for like testing a player death to kind of, but this is a more functional where you can actually quit out to the main menu now. And I had to do a lot of reworking because this part of functionality was completely broken from the last prototype. Everything had changed. So now we can go ahead and see what happens when we reload here, if everything works. So in a development environment, we'll have to actually see if things actually work. I wouldn't know if it would actually work. Yeah, I would. This is one of the things I didn't test. When you actually start the game, not from the main menu, reloading the game. Yeah, it's like starting the game from the editor. That's not one of the cases I tested. I usually started in development environment with the main menu and cycle through the development environment, and that would work. But doing it from here, this is just this setup is now that I moved on to something else, but let's restart this. But in the end, I was able to get pretty confident in it, and the actual functionality of being able to restart the game from the main menu, and that's going to be needed because for certain reasons. But one of the things I'm going to need to do is when in order to like test the checkpoint, like if I die over here, if I quit the game, I want to make sure the checkpoint reloads in the last checkpoint position. Also, a bunch of other cases. So like quitting the game, reloading the app, and also it has to work in a production environment too. So it has to load to persistent data, like so it works between app sessions. So a lot of stuff. So the main goal for next week is getting this checkpoint system really implemented and working how I envision it to be. So a lot of systems work. On the side though, so in order to test like actually persistent loading in a production build, I actually have to get the production build working, and I've been trying to do that unsuccessfully since what was it, August? Yeah, probably August. And you know, the build process, it takes so freaking long. And what was happening here is what I was doing was I was working on this project, and then at the night I'd be like, oh, I would run it at night, you know, because it's gonna compile all night for hours and hours, you know, compiling shader variants, and that's fine. But every time I'd start a run in the night, it would look like it's going, and I go to sleep, and then it would, you know, come back in the morning, and it's like, you know, it failed 20 minutes in because of some inner process, whatever, you know, like it's just like, okay, and over again, I'd never get it run stable, because what was happening, I was always making changes in the development environment, and the underlying assumptions of my production build, you know, something would break under the hood, and you know, I'd have to fix it the next day and then test it in the middle of the day and be like, okay, it looks like it's running, there's no errors, but then I had changed something again, and then the cycle would repeat itself. So what I needed to do was actually was to get another project set up. That way I could start doing a build off a main branch that's stable and not going anywhere, not changing, and start doing a build and compiling a build off that branch that's not changing, just so I could have a baseline test and then keep updating that individual. That's the only way to do it, because it just takes so darn long, like, and you know, it just felt like I was getting nowhere at actually getting the build done. So right now I got another project set up, and I got it basically looking the exact same. There's a few things I needed to fix that didn't carry over from Git, but basically it's the same project working as it should of an earlier version. And so for the past 3 nights, I think it's like, you know, 8 hours a piece, you know, it's still not done compiling all the shader variants. So it was like, you know, 20 plus hours still compiling. So hopefully I actually can finally get a build out of this very first level, and from there we can move on, and then hopefully I can do a merge back and then merge into my main project, and then keep this separate project for builds, just so I can test things, because I'm gonna be needing to test things in a production build as far as persistent data goes. Until then, I'll have to hold off on those actual tests, but that needs to be tested that it works between production build, app reloads. So working on that as well. So I was kind of yeah, I was working on the checkpoint system. So for the checkpoint system, I think there's like two cases. One case is like, let's just say you hit a checkpoint at this door, and okay, you have a checkpoint here, you do your thing, you're all over the level, and then let's just say you die within the actual scene. The system needs to say, okay, you're in the same scene, so I can just use the current scene and reload you where you were. I just have to make sure that you know that the system can handle reloading. If you're in a different sector, um, if you died like way over here in a different sector, make sure that when you put the position there that everything is loaded correctly, like the sector and the actual camera is set correctly. That's the base case. The other case is if you have a checkpoint in this sector and you die, let's just say you're going, and you go to like the elevator or something, and you go to the next scene, right? You load the next scene, and you're in the next scene, and then you die there. The system has to know, okay, your checkpoint wasn't in the scene. I gotta go and make sure to unload this scene and then load the scene that the checkpoint was in, and then repeat the base process of setting your position correctly, setting the loaded sector and the cameras and everything else that needs to be set. So this system has to work like that. And also when you cross a checkpoint line, the actual data, the system to actually save your current checkpoint to the persistent, the persistent system of the, level manager? Yeah, level manager has this level data, and it has this kind of, these data structures, this current checkpoint here, and we can say, it has all the data information where the player should be spawned and this and that. So, yeah, so the first part of the checkpoint system, like clearing the way in order to implement this new system, is in place, and I just have to continue next week implementing the checkpoint system. I should be able to, if not get done with that, make good progress in order to complete that. So we'll be working on that. Yeah, just like during the end of the week, it was there was just a lot. I was reloading this first level, and of course ever since I changed the structure of the main character, just a lot of things have been broken, and I've had to track down a lot of issues, like things like going up the stairs, loading a new scene level, just a handful of issues that used to work but aren't working anymore, like odd things like going in between sectors, like the shadows weren't working. So anything that didn't look, it's like, why is, this isn't working, that isn't working. So just a lot of the time is consumed by, every time I see something out of place, a bug that's not working, I kind of have to get to the root cause of it, and that's kind of time consuming. But it usually boils down to a problem where, some other system is trying to parse a reference from the main character. Whether it's an internal and vector system, it's trying to look up to or it's assuming that the script is on the root, which is not anymore, or it's like an external one that's trying to communicate with the player game object, assuming that everything's on the root and it's not. So that's usually the case. I just have to like find it and test it and fix it. So sometimes I have to go over and structure code to overwrite certain functions and methods in order to get it working right. But yeah, one of the last thing I was working on, I think it was with the elevator, like interacting with the actual call button. The actual action is broken now. It's just things like that used to work, but there was no way around it. I had to restructure the I had to restructure the main character game object and break its components into children object, because it was just, the performance of the editor was just dying every time I opened up I wanted to see a single component. I just want to see the input manager, but the frame rate in the editor just slows down to nothing. Just so I can take a look at the input. That's not. So now I can look at different components without slowing down the whole gameplay. But so I was working, was it Thursday or something, and I got a bunch of work done, but then something happened with my repository that's never happened before. It got out of whack, and I was trying to fix it, but I ended up nuking my project, so I had to kind of re-download everything and get it all working again. That kind of screwed up my schedule, but I was able to get my 40 hours in this week on the project, and I think I made a lot of good progress. Things are looking better each week. So, like I said, next week we'll keep working on the checkpoint system as we were. It'll be all good, and stay tuned for that. More updates in the future. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time.